Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. Um, Today we're going to be talking about something that's super familiar to all of us, but maybe we haven't thought about too deeply. I'm talking about our senses.
Yeah. It's like we use them every single day, right?
Yeah.
But we kind of take them for granted.
Exactly. So we're going to go way beyond, what you might have learned in like a basic bio class. We're going to explore the how and the why of how our senses actually work. You know, how we smell those freshly baked cookies, or how we hear our favorite song, or even how we just feel the chair we're sitting on.
It's really incredible when you stop and think about all the things that are happening behind the scenes.
So, to kick things off, let's get back to the basics for a sec. What exactly are our senses picking up on? Like, how does my brain know that I'm touching something rough versus something smooth?
Okay, so basically, all over your body, you have these things called sensory receptors. They're like tiny little sensors, and they're designed to detect different types of energy. So
Mhm.
we're talking light, sound waves, pressure, chemicals.
Wait, so it's like my skin is covered in tiny little microphones and cameras and stuff.
Not exactly like that, but the basic idea is similar. So, for example, in your skin, you have receptors that respond to pressure. So, some are for light touch, some are for like a deeper pressure. You also have receptors for temperature, hot and cold. And then there are even receptors for pain.
Okay, that makes sense. But I've noticed that some parts of my body are way more sensitive than others. Like, I can feel a tiny little crumb on my fingertip, but I wouldn't even notice it if it was on my back. Why is that?
That's a great observation. And it all comes down to this concept of receptive fields. It's kind of like imagining your skin as this giant touchscreen.
Yeah.
And each receptor is responsible for a certain area on that touchscreen, kind of like a pixel.
Okay, I'm following you.
So in areas like your fingertips where you have a ton of receptors packed really close together, those receptive fields are tiny. So that means you're getting really, really detailed information about what's touching you.
Ah.
But on your back, where the receptors are more spread out, the receptive fields are much larger, so you're not getting as much detail. It's like having a lower resolution on your touchscreen.
So it's like my fingertips have a high definition screen and my back has like a more old school pixelated one.
Precisely. And this difference in receptive field size explains why, you can read Braille with your fingertips, but you wouldn't be able to with your back.
Right, makes sense.
Because you need those teeny tiny, densely packed receptive fields to pick up on all those subtle variations in the raised dots.
Wow, that's super cool.
Yeah,
But wouldn't our brains like totally get overloaded if we were paying attention to every little sensation all the time?
you're right. It'd be complete sensory chaos. But thankfully, our brains are really good at filtering out information and focusing on what's important.
Y-
And one way they do this is through something called sensory adaptation.
Okay, so what's that?
Basically, our receptors become less sensitive to a constant stimulus over time.
So like when you jump into a cold pool and it's like shocking at first, but then you get used to it after a while.
Exactly. Your temperature receptors are adapting to that cold water, so the sensation becomes less intense. And it's the same reason why, you don't constantly feel your clothes on your skin, even though they're technically touching you all the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these sensory receptors picking up on all these signals, and our brain is deciding what to pay attention to. But how does this all actually work for a specific sense, like smell? Like, how do I actually sniff out those delicious cookies baking in the oven?
Well, imagine your nose is kind of like this high-tech lab, right? And it's filled with millions of these tiny specialized detectors. And they're called chemoreceptors. And these guys, they're designed to pick up on specific chemicals that are floating around in the air.
Okay, so when the smell of those warm cookies wafts into my nose, those chemicals are triggering specific detectors.
Yep. And
But how does my brain actually know that that means chocolate chip cookie, not like duty socks?
that's where things get really interesting. Each type of odor molecule actually has a unique shape, okay? And it fits into a specific receptor, kind of like a key in a lock. So when a molecule binds to its matching receptor, it triggers a signal that travels up to your brain, carrying information about that specific smell.
So it's kind of like a giant puzzle, with each smell having its own unique puzzle piece.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And what's even more fascinating is that the pathway for smell is actually different from most of your other
Oh,
senses.
really?
Yeah, so instead of going through this relay station in the brain called the thalamus, smell signals, they go directly to the temporal lobe, which is super involved in memory and emotion.
Wait, so you're saying smell has like a VIP pass straight to the emotional control center of my brain? No wonder smells can trigger such strong memories. Like I can instantly be transported back to my grandma's kitchen just by smelling cinnamon.
Exactly. That direct connection might be one reason why smells are so powerful when it comes to evoking those emotions and memories.
Okay, so we've sniffed out the secrets of smell. Now let's move on to its partner in crime, taste. What's the story there?
All right, so think of your tongue like a taste testing lab, and it's covered in these tiny bumps called papillae.
Papaway, okay.
And each papilla contains taste buds, which are basically clusters of taste receptor cells.
So when I take a bite of food, those taste buds are like doing the analysis.
Exactly. And just like with smell, there are specific receptors for different tastes, right? We've got sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami.
Umami, I love that one.
Umami is like that savory, meaty flavor. And each of these tastes, they actually serve an evolutionary purpose. They're helping us to identify foods that are good for us and avoid the ones that might be harmful.
So like a sweet taste tells us that something is high in energy, and a bitter taste might warn us about potential poisons.
Exactly. And it's not just about survival. These tastes also contribute to our enjoyment of food. You know that perfect balance of sweet, salty, sour, and umami. That's what makes a dish truly delicious.
I'm starting to realize how much I take my senses for granted. They're like little superheroes, working tirelessly to keep me informed and entertained.
They really are.
But tell me, what about sight? My eyes feel pretty complex.
They are. Get ready for a wild ride through the eye. First, you have all these supporting structures, like the lacrimal glands, which constantly produce tears. They're keeping your eyes lubricated and clean.
It's like a tiny sprinkler system for my eyeballs. But what about focusing? How do my eyes adjust to see things both near and far?
So that's where this dynamic duo comes in the ciliary body and the lens. Think of the ciliary body as this tiny muscle that's pulling on the lens, changing its shape to focus light onto the retina.
So it's like adjusting the zoom on a camera.
Precisely. And then you have the iris, which is that colorful part of your eye. It controls the size of the pupil, which is that black hole in the center, and it regulates the amount of light that's entering your eye, kind of like adjusting the aperture on a camera.
Wow, it's amazing how many analogies there are
That's
between our eyes and cameras.
It's a pretty good comparison. Now, the real magic happens on the retina, which is like the screen at the back of your eye. This is where those light signals are converted into electrical signals that your brain can actually understand.
This is like a translator, converting light language into brain language.
Exactly. And this translation is done by special cells called photoreceptors. And the most important ones are the rods and cones.
Rods and cones, yeah, I've heard of those.
Rods are super sensitive to light, which lets you see in dim conditions, but they don't see in color. Cones, on the other hand, they're responsible for color vision.
So it's like rods are the black and white film and cones are the color film.
I like that analogy. And just like a color TV screen uses red, green, and blue pixels to create all those colors you see, your cones are also specialized to detect these three primary colors. So by combining signals from these different cones, your brain creates the perception of this whole spectrum of colors.
So it's all about teamwork, even down at the cellular level.
Exactly. But how do our eyes adjust to those drastic changes in light levels? You know, like going from bright sunlight to a dark movie theater.
Right, right.
Well, that's thanks to another amazing adaptation mechanism called, you guessed it, light and dark adaptation. So in bright light, your cones are doing most of the work. But when you enter a dark room, your rods take over, and they become more sensitive over time to help you see in low light.
So it's like my eyes have a built-in night vision mode.
Exactly. And then when you step back out into the sunlight, your cones quickly adjust back to those brighter conditions. It's a truly remarkable system that allows us to see clearly in this whole range of lighting environments.
It's like our eyes are constantly fine-tuning themselves for optimal viewing pleasure.
Now let's talk about some special areas within the retina. Have you ever heard of the fovea?
That sounds kind of familiar. Refresh my memory.
Okay, so imagine the fovea as like the VIP section of your retina. It's packed with cones, and it's responsible for your sharpest vision. It's located right in the center of your retina, directly behind the pupil. So when you're trying to focus on something specific, like reading a text message or spotting a friend in a crowd, you're using your fovea to get the clearest possible image.
So it's like the high-resolution zoom lens of my eye.
Exactly. And then there's the blind spot, which is this small area on the retina where the optic nerve actually exits the eye.
Wait, so there's like a part of my visual field that's completely blank. That's kind of freaky.
It sounds strange, but you don't usually notice it because your brain is really good at filling in those gaps using information from your other eye and the surrounding visual field. But here's a fun experiment. You can try to actually demonstrate your blind spot. Cover your right eye and stare at a specific spot. Now, slowly move a small object, like your finger, from the side towards the center of your vision. At some point, the object's going to completely disappear. That's because it's fallen on your blind spot. Keep moving your finger, and it'll reappear once it moves out of the blind spot.
Wow, that is so cool. I never realized my brain was playing tricks on me like that.
It's a great example of how our brains actively construct our perception of the world. It's using information from our senses to create this seamless and coherent experience.
This is already blowing my mind. We haven't even gotten to hearing and balance yet. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our sensory adventure. We just finished exploring the amazing world of sight, but did you know that our sense of hearing is just as incredible?
I am so ready to have my mind blown again. But before we dive in, I got to ask, how is sound even a thing? Like, I know it's vibrations in the air, but how do those vibrations actually become music or someone's voice?
That's a great question. Think about it like this. When you clap your hands, you're creating a disturbance in the air, and you're sending out these waves of pressure. And those waves, those are what we call sound waves, and they travel through the air until they reach your ear.
So my ears are basically like sound wave catchers.
Exactly. Your outer ear acts like a funnel, so it's collecting those sound waves and directing them down the ear canal towards your eardrum.
And the eardrum is like a tiny drum in my ear. Sorry, that seems obvious, but I never really thought about it like
Yeah,
that.
got it. And just like a real drum, the eardrum vibrates when those sound waves hit it. And those vibrations, they get passed along to three tiny bones in your middle ear: the malleus, the incus, and the stapes.
Wait, there are bones in my ear? I always thought it was just like a hollow space.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. These tiny bones, they act like a lever system, so they're amplifying the vibrations from the eardrum and transmitting them to the inner ear.
Okay, so the outer ear catches the sound waves, the eardrum vibrates, and those tiny bones amplify the vibrations. But where do the vibrations go from there?
That's where things get really wild. So the inner ear, it houses the cochlea, which is this spiral-shaped structure, and it's filled with fluid. And inside the cochlea are thousands of tiny hair cells. And each one of these is tuned to a specific frequency of sound.
So it's kind of like that piano keyboard analogy that we were talking about with the retina.
Exactly. Different frequencies of sound, from the low rumble of a bass guitar to the high pitch of a whistle, they vibrate different parts of the cochlea, activating those specific hair cells.
So like if I'm listening to a rock concert, different parts of my cochlea are going wild depending on what instruments are playing.
Exactly. And those hair cells don't just vibrate, they convert those vibrations into electrical signals that then travel along the auditory nerve to your brain.
So it's like there's this tiny concert happening inside my ear, and then my brain gets the front row seat experience.
That's a great way to put it. But here's the truly mind-blowing part. Your brain doesn't just hear those individual frequencies. It processes them into complex sounds. Music, voices, and everything else that you hear.
It's incredible to think that all these tiny little hair cells vibrating are what create the soundtrack to our lives.
Absolutely. And did you know that our ears, they also play a crucial role in our sense of balance?
Wait, balance? I thought that was all about my inner ear too.
You're right. The inner ear, it houses both the cochlea for hearing and the vestibular system, which is for balance.
Okay, so how does that work? Like, how do I know if I'm standing upright or if I'm about to fall over?
Well, the vestibular system, it contains these structures called the utricle, saccule, and semicircular canals. And they're all filled with fluid and lined with tiny hair cells, just like the cochlea. But instead of responding to sound waves, these hair cells, they respond to movement and gravity.
So it's like my inner ear is a built-in level, telling me which way is up.
Exactly. When you tilt your head or move your body, the fluid in those structures shifts and it bends the hair cells. And this sends signals to your brain about your head's position and movement.
So that's why I feel dizzy when I spin around,
Mm.
because the fluid in my inner ear is sloshing around.
Precisely. That dizziness, that's your brain trying to make sense of all these conflicting signals it's getting from your vestibular system.
Okay, so my ears are responsible for both hearing and balance. Talk about multitasking. But I have to ask, how are our senses all connected? It seems like they all kind of do their own thing.
That's a great question. So while each sense has its own, specialized receptors and pathways, they don't operate in isolation. In fact, our senses are constantly working together, influencing each other, and creating this much richer and more complex experience of the world than any one sense could on its own.
So it's like they're all part of a team, sharing information, and working together to create the big picture.
Exactly. Think about something as simple as eating a slice of pizza. It's not just about the taste, right?
Definitely not. The smell of that melted cheese, the sight of that crispy crust, the feel of that warm, gooey cheese in my mouth, even the sound of the crunch when I bite into it. It all adds up to that full pizza experience.
Exactly. Your senses are working together to create this whole symphony of sensations. Your sense of smell enhances your perception of taste and your sense of sight. It gives you information about the texture and appearance of the food.
I never realized how much my senses were like influencing each other without me even knowing it.
It happens all the time. For example, have you ever noticed that food tastes kind of bland when you have a stuffy nose?
Oh yeah, totally. When I'm sick, everything tastes like cardboard.
That's because your sense of smell is blocked and you're missing out on a crucial part of that whole flavor perception. Or think about how, scary movies, they use sound effects to heighten your sense of fear.
Ooh yeah, those sudden loud noises always make me jump. But even without those jump scares, like just the eerie music and the sound effects can create this creepy atmosphere.
Exactly. The sound, it's influencing your emotional response to the movie, making it more intense, more engaging. Our senses are constantly working together to create this multi-sensory experience of the world.
It's like they're all part of an orchestra, each playing their part to create this beautiful and complex symphony of perception.
I love that analogy. And this interplay between our senses, it isn't just about making our experiences more enjoyable. It also plays a crucial role in our survival.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, imagine you're walking through the woods, right?
Hmm.
And you hear a rustling in the bushes. Your sense of hearing, it alerts you to potential danger. And then your sense of sight kicks in, and you start scanning the area, trying to identify what made that sound.
So my senses are working together to, like, keep me safe.
Exactly. They're constantly communicating with each other, helping you to navigate the world and avoid any potential threats. And this sensory teamwork, it's not just about responding to danger, it also helps us to learn and make sense of the world around us.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see the world in a whole new light, or should I say, hear it in a whole new sound.
That's the power of understanding your senses. It opens up this whole new level of awareness and appreciation for all the incredible ways that our bodies interact with the world.
I'm definitely feeling more in tune with my senses already. But tell me, is there anything more to this sensory story? Welcome back. I'm still kind of reeling from all these amazing things we've learned about our senses. It's just incredible how much is happening behind the scenes, to create our experience of the world.
It really is a symphony of sensations, isn't it? And as fascinating as our own senses are, it's kind of mind-blowing to consider, like the incredible diversity of sensory experiences across the animal kingdom.
Oh yeah, totally. I've always been so amazed by those animals that have senses that are just way beyond anything we humans can even experience. Like bats navigating by echolocation or sharks sensing electrical fields. It's like they have superpowers.
They really do. Their sensory worlds are so different from ours. For instance, did you know that a dog's sense of smell is estimated to be like 10,000 to 100,000 times more acute than ours?
Wait, seriously, that's insane. No wonder my dogs spend so much time sniffing everything.
Exactly. They're experiencing a whole world of smells that we're completely oblivious to. It's like they're watching a high-definition smell-o-vision movie while we're stuck with a grainy black and white version.
That's a hilarious analogy. So what makes their noses so much more powerful than ours?
Well, for one thing, they have a much larger olfactory bulb, which is that part of the brain that processes smells. And they also have way more olfactory receptors, those specialized detectors we talked about earlier. Some breeds, like bloodhounds, have over 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our, measly 5 million.
Wow, so they're basically like smell experts. I guess that explains why they're so good at tracking scents.
Exactly. And it's not just dogs. Plenty of other animals have these sensory superpowers that just put our senses to shame. Some birds can actually see magnetic fields, which helps them to navigate during migration. Imagine having a built-in compass.
That's so cool. It's like they have a sixth sense that we don't even possess.
And then there are certain fish that can detect changes in water pressure, which allows them to sense approaching predators or prey, even in murky water.
It's just amazing how evolution has fine-tuned these senses to help animals thrive in their specific environments.
Absolutely. It makes you realize just how limited our own sensory experience of the world really is. It's like we're only seeing this tiny sliver of the full spectrum of sensory possibilities.
It's kind of humbling, isn't it, to think there might be these whole sensory realms out there that we're completely unaware of because we simply don't have the necessary receptors or the brain power to perceive them.
It really is. It makes you wonder what other senses might be out there waiting to be discovered. And it just makes you appreciate the incredible diversity and ingenuity of nature.
It's like nature is a master inventor, constantly experimenting and coming up with new and amazing ways for animals to experience the world.
And, studying these amazing animal senses, it isn't just about satisfying our curiosity. It can actually inspire new technologies and solutions to human problems.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Well, for example, researchers are studying echolocation in bats to try to develop more sophisticated sonar systems for underwater navigation and mapping. They're basically trying to mimic the bat's natural sonar to create better technology.
So we're taking inspiration from nature's designs. That's so cool.
Exactly. It's called biomimicry, and it's a growing field. Scientists are also looking at the visual systems of insects to design more efficient and sensitive light detectors.
It's like nature is providing us with a blueprint for innovation. Instead of always trying to reinvent the wheel, we can look to the natural world for solutions that have already been, like, perfected over millions of years of evolution.
Exactly. And I think there's a really important lesson in that. We tend to think of ourselves as the most intelligent species on Earth, but there's just so much wisdom and ingenuity in the natural world that we can learn from.
I'm definitely feeling a renewed sense of awe and wonder at the natural world, and a lot more appreciation for my own senses, even if they're not quite as superpowered as bats or sharks.
And even though we may not have echolocation or the ability to see magnetic fields, we still have this amazing array of senses that allow us to experience the world in these really rich and meaningful ways. The key is to pay attention to those senses, to be mindful of those sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and textures that surround us.
That's such a great point. I think we often take our senses for granted, but they really are a gift.
They are. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage you to go out there and explore the world with all your senses. Notice those subtle nuances of flavor in your food, the intricate patterns of light and shadow in your surroundings, the delicate interplay of sounds in a piece of music.
That's a wonderful challenge. It's like a mindfulness exercise for our senses.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe by paying closer attention to our own senses and learning from the amazing sensory abilities of other animals, we might even discover new senses within ourselves, hidden potentials just waiting to be unlocked.
That's such a fascinating and inspiring thought to end on. Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible sensory journey. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to my senses from now on.
It's been my pleasure. Remember, the world is a sensory playground just waiting to be explored. So go out there, be curious, and let your senses be your guide.